What kind of data can you extract from Wi-Fi networks, and what can you use all this data for? On today's show, we'll get the answers from Aerohive's Stephen Hoy. Join us right after this short message. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wi-Fi Now TV. And my name is Claus Hetting, and this, of course, is the show that brings you all the stories and all these other great people from across the Wi-Fi industry. Today, I have a legendary Wi-Fi company, Aerohive, on the show in the form of Business Development Manager Stephen Hoy. He's going to be joining us in just a moment, and we'll be talking about how to put Wi-Fi data to good use, and also talk a little bit about IoT, I think. So looking forward to that. That's coming up in just a moment. Now, before we do that, I want to make sure that you know that we're taking Wi-Fi Now, the Expo and Conference, to London, UK, that great city indeed, this October 25 to 27. There's a little bit more than 2 weeks to go, and already more than 300 passionate Wi-Fi folks have registered for this event, and so can you. We have more than 40 expert speakers ready to share their insights. And not least, we also have an expo with about 30 companies participating. There's lots of great stuff to do at this event. So check out our event program, find out more about everything at wifinow.international. And if you have any questions, drop me a line at klaus@wifinowevents.com. Always really great to hear from anybody out there with questions, comments, whatever is on your mind. I'm happy to hear from you. So that's it for my plug for today. And I'd like to introduce my guest for this show, Mr. Stephen Hoy of Aerohive. Stephen, welcome.
Hi, Klaus. Good to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you. And you're coming to us live from your office/studio in London, as I understand it, which is very cool, by the way, because you were showing that to me just a moment ago. But yeah. Stephen, let's talk a little bit about Wi-Fi. And no, actually, before we go into the data part, give us the short introduction to Aerohive Networks for the viewers out there who are not familiar with you.
Sure. So Aerohive Networks is the world's largest independent and fastest growing cloud networking company. So we're 10 years old, and it's really all around the power of the cloud and the ability to really innovate in a sector that I think really is asking for that right now. So for us, we always like to be the thought leader on this one. So it's good to be here today and share some of our ideas with you.
Well, that's great. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you guys, I've been following you guys for a while. Remember you guys for being famous for distributed architecture and also a lot of campus networks. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's still a core business for us. But it's interesting you raise that, because the concept of cooperative control that we innovated and really has been the basis of our platform has set us onto another trajectory that actually wouldn't be possible without that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. So let's get into the world of Wi-Fi data, and there's a tremendous amount of data available on Wi-Fi networks. How would you describe the various categories of data, if you like, available on Wi-Fi networks? And my follow-up questions, which you also will get to answer a little bit, what can we use all that data for? But go ahead maybe with the first one.
Yeah, I think the idea of categorizing that data is actually really very important, because typically, even if we take a step before that, we should categorize the reason for why we're interested in that data in the first place. So if we're looking at the edge of the network and Wi-Fi and wireless networking as a whole, it's typically always been a value around information technology. So it's an IT focus. It's an IT project with an IT budget. And this has clearly been traditional for networking as a whole. The other category that we think is a newer category that is only now really starting to unravel the way that it can is really around the business value that this IT projects and IT data can actually yield to the whole organization and the whole business, whether that be a campus, a large enterprise deployment, a small enterprise deployment, healthcare, whatever that vertical market is. Actually, there's a lot of business value to be gained for a whole host of stakeholders beyond just those looking at architecting and deploying an IT network.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think the data can be usefully employed, so to speak, by Wi-Fi network owners, businesses of various kinds? It can be governments, campuses, whatnot.
Yeah, and it's a great question, because really we need to start thinking about what this connectivity is actually yielding at the end of it. Connectivity is now a utility. Electricity, gas, oil, Wi-Fi. It's an expectation. We only have to look in hospitality. There's lots of statistics out there. There's an interesting one I read this morning. Almost 60% of expect Wi-Fi in their holiday accommodation. Just holidaying in the UK alone. I asked that question earlier today. How many of you are happy with that? And almost nobody put their hands up. So it's not just a question of connectivity, it's the value that it generates behind it. And the real value comes from understanding those different segments of data. So really, to answer your question, if we think about what the network is collecting at the edge, it's everything from who is doing what, where, and when. And really, if you have those four pieces delivered very neatly in a nice consumable package in a consumable way, you can then surmise the why and start to help deliver personalized services from wireless connectivity, as opposed to broad services to try and treat everybody as a group.
I think it's a great answer. Can you give us a few examples maybe of companies actually doing this from any of your segments or verticals? It could be hospitality, healthcare, whatnot.
Yeah, lots of examples. We could probably fill up the next 6 hours doing this, but I think for today's purpose, a few always jump out at me. One of those is looking at the retailing operations side. So shopping malls and shopping centers is an interesting one where we have some work going on at the moment. And this is where a shopping mall can go beyond offering services to the retailers that are present there. And we have examples in Europe where what they are now able to do is, with the data collection they're getting from offering Wi-Fi services, connectivity at its core, to visitors to that shopping center and to the retailers themselves, they can now determine, influenced as well by weather, special events taking place, particular store, holding store sales, the large multinationals. All of that data is being put into one large pot. And now they can predict operationally, how many security guards do I need on that entrance on Saturday? How many cleaning staff do I need, and where do I need them, based on actual people that are physically in the mall right now? The flip side is that as you collect this data, the ability to store it and process it seamlessly as big data in a meaningful way means you have then predictive analytics to go one stage further, where they can now say to shop, and this is where it's funded, is to say back to the retail store, I can now evidence how busy that you are actually in the highest traffic zone, seeing the most return on your investment of being part of our shopping mall. Unfortunately, we need to put up your rent or your lease. I doubt they'll be reducing it on the other side, but.
Right. I think all of those are very good examples on the operational side. But what we've also seen, and there's a number of companies, of course, out there, in addition to you guys, working strongly on the consumer engagement side. And that, would you care to comment on that? Because that's a more difficult area to work in, given that you don't want to do anything creepy to people, and surprise them by the fact that the shop owner, actually knows who you are and that sort of thing. Would you care to comment on some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is an area that comes up every day. And I think the most interesting thing about this is the fact that the legal implications aren't clear around tracking individuals without their knowledge, as far as a MAC address goes for a particular device ID. And it's interesting how different European, different European countries are approaching this differently, because there's we're not quite sure approach right now. So the way that we treat this is, think of it as in two separate categories. You have your big data for general traffic flows. I'm understanding how many devices compared with last week have just walked past our store. Mm-hmm. It should not be ever a personally identifiable information breach. And that is important. The key thing there is about encryption of that data one way. We're not effectively interested in individuals. What we are interested in is understanding flows of people. And of course, that's even beyond retail into education. Where do people go? How many? What resources am I going to need to serve them? I was going to say the second piece where it really comes to life is when you offer a value exchange that enables those unknown people to want to join your network. And it's so easy to do it without giving away personal identifiable information that they suddenly become a real sponsor of actually joining your network, accepting the terms because the value is so strong back to them.
So, right, okay. But what's interesting, I think, from this conversation is several things, but I like the fact that you're actually saying that one of the monetization sources is actually the operational benefits, right? Mm. And that being a proven source of monetization, because you know as well as I that everybody in the Wi-Fi industry is looking for ways to monetize Wi-Fi, but the operational is now proven as far as I can tell from what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even if we look at it in its simplest form of understanding that real estate, is expensive, especially if we're looking at premium in a city, whether it be government or retail, for example, how effective, what utilization of that space, Wi-Fi monitoring data. So understanding how many devices, how often, for how long. Arguably, when we get really smart, we bring in the who element and identify who are these people? Are they known to us? Are they not known to us? Mm-hmm. When we can start to segment and classify these data streams, then we can say, do you know what? We need a bigger building. We need a smaller building. We've got statistical evidence to show that we are not effectively using our meeting room, for example. So that's a classic one, is we have a meeting room facility. No one ever can find a meeting room in their offices ever. And they walk past and see there are 5 seats empty in a 10-seated room. If you could statistically prove that was always the case, then for the cost of €500, you can build a wall and double your meeting room space overnight. So you've just suddenly increased the return on that investment, and Wi-Fi has actually enabled you to do that.
Very good examples indeed, Stephen. Thank you for bringing those forward. I think they really are very good. Let's talk a little bit about IoT, and we don't talk about IoT very often on the show because I think there's so much fluffy stuff happening out there that's
agree.
Concretized and bring down to earth and so on. But let's talk a little bit about generally Wi-Fi and IoT. Do you think that Wi-Fi has a role to play in IoT? And if so, are the solutions in place, and how do you see all of that playing out?
Yeah, and of course, Wi-Fi is non-exclusive in the fact that IoT needs to make a connection to something, either to collect data or to transmit data. So the simplification of the onboarding of those devices is actually a challenge when they don't have an operating system and a screen and a keyboard and a mouse to physically do that. But what you do want to do is still retain its identity as an individual device. So, for example, using tools like ours, such as the private pre-shared key model, which we innovated to give every individual device or user their own individual key, and suddenly flip this on its head and say, not only is there a simplified way of onboarding, but more importantly, we now get very granular in the analytics that we capture to understand the behavior of these devices, right through to if a refrigerator, which is Wi-Fi enabled, is suddenly starting for access to Active Directory, we're pretty sure it's no longer a fridge or someone's found their way in there. So behavioral monitoring is also something that's important with IoT to understand.
Well, these are excellent insights, Stephen. I want to ask you perhaps one final question. What would be your concrete advice for any company enterprise, for example, right now looking at starting a Wi-Fi deployment project, to get all these things right? There's a lot of technical issues, but now here specifically, we're talking about data, right?
Absolutely. And because it's data, it affects the whole organization. So what I would say is the first thing is don't treat any Wi-Fi project as a silo. It is going to have an impact on everybody in that organization. For a positive spin, everyone in that organization, if they can see a personalized benefit back to them and something that enables them to do their job better or allow their business unit to grow, they will also, of course, be offering funding for that project. And we've seen that happen in the real world, where marketing has overridden the IT budget and said, there's so much value back to us, we will pay for that project. So that's where understanding business value data suddenly yields organization growth like it's not been done before. The flip side, of course, and the challenge right now is that HR doesn't talk to IT. Marketing may not be talking to IT the same way that they could be, and understanding as an organization, working together on this is actually the better option.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great answer, Stephen. And by the way, we look forward to having you say a lot more about this topic at Wi-Fi Now in London, where you'll be speaking, and Aerohive will be there. And of course, people can come and see all the great work that you're doing in practice at your stand and all that. So thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on, and stay well. And please come back and see us again. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right, everybody, that's it for today. And of course, don't forget to go to wifinow.international to register for our London event, and where you will meet Aerohive, of course, and many other great companies in Wi-Fi. That's it, and see you next time for another episode, and thank you for watching.
Wi-Fi Now is a production of RCR TV News. To suggest a show topic or to learn more about Wi-Fi Now events, you can reach Claus Hetting at klaus@hettingconsulting.com. To find out more about Wi-Fi Now and all things wireless, visit rcrwireless.com.